Imagine standing before the greatest military machine the ancient world had ever seen. Its soldiers march beneath imperial standards. Its roads cross continents. Its governors command cities. Its laws reach farther than most people of the ancient world could imagine. And then, somewhere beyond the imperial palace, a queen decides she will not obey. One queen would turn Roman Britain into a battlefield. Another would attack Roman Egypt and carry away the face of the emperor himself. And centuries later, a third would build a powerful kingdom that stretched across some of Rome's richest eastern territories. Their names were Boudica, Ammonirines, and Zenobia. They lived in different centuries. They ruled different peoples. Their kingdoms could not match Roman population, wealth, or military resources. And yet, each forced Rome to confront a dangerous possibility. What happens when the people Rome expects to submit decide they would rather fight? Their stories contain betrayal, revenge, political calculation, war, destruction, and mysteries that historians still cannot completely solve. Because the most surprising part is not that these queens challenged Rome. It is how close some of them came to changing the balance of power. But what really happened? The first queen, Boudica. Britain, around AD 60. The Roman conquest was still relatively young. Rome had invaded Britain under Emperor Claudius in AD 43, but much of the island remained outside direct Roman control. Some local rulers cooperated with Rome, hoping to preserve their authority. One of them was Prasutagus, king of the Iceni. His kingdom existed in what is now eastern England. And according to the Roman historian Tacitus, Prasutagus attempted to protect his family by naming Emperor Nero as co-heir alongside his two daughters. It was a desperate political calculation. But after Prasutagus died, Roman officials did not simply respect his arrangement. Tacitus claims that the Iceni kingdom was plundered, leading to the brutal mistreatment of Boudica and her family. The Roman sources describe Boudica being flogged and her daughters assaulted. We should pause here. These details come primarily from Roman historians writing decades after the revolt. We do not possess Boudica's own account. So while the revolt itself is firmly established, historians must treat some dramatic details with caution. But something is clear. The Iceni were angry. And they were not alone. The neighboring Trinovants joined them. Then the rebellion exploded. Colchester was attacked. The Roman settlement was destroyed. And suddenly, Rome's supposedly secure province was burning. The rebels moved toward Londinium. The city was not yet the enormous metropolis it would become. It was a young commercial center, growing around the Thames. But Roman governor Suetonius Paulinus understood the danger. He could not defend everything. So Londinium was abandoned. Then the rebels entered. Buildings burned. People were killed. And archaeologists have found evidence of destruction layers associated with this violent period. But that was only the beginning. Because Boudica was no longer simply defending a local kingdom. She had become the leader of a rebellion against Rome itself. And Rome was about to discover that conquest was easier than control. Suetonius Paulinus returned with a Roman force. Boudica's army was enormous by ancient standards, although the exact numbers reported by Roman historians are almost certainly exaggerated. Tacitus presents the final confrontation as a battle in which the rebels vastly outnumbered the Romans. But numbers alone do not win battles. The Romans had discipline, armor, training, and a battlefield chosen to favor their smaller army. The rebellion was crushed. Tacitus gives an enormous number of British dead, but ancient casualty figures are notoriously unreliable. What happened afterward was more certain. The revolt had failed. Boudica disappeared from the historical record. Tacitus says she died by poison. Cassius Dio gives a different account, also claiming that she died after the defeat. But we have no independent evidence confirming exactly how she died. And that uncertainty matters. Because Boudica became one of the most famous women in British history, but much of the image people remember comes from Roman writers and later centuries. Her revolt did not destroy Roman Britain. Rome survived. But it exposed something the empire could not ignore. Conquest created resentment. And resentment could become rebellion. The Romans responded with both force and political adjustment. Nero eventually replaced the hardline governor with a more conciliatory administration. The empire had learned a lesson. Sometimes the most effective way to rule conquered people was not simply to punish them. It was to convince them that resistance was pointless. But thousands of miles away, another queen was about to prove that resistance could produce something Rome did not expect at all. A negotiated retreat. The second queen, Amanirenas, travels south along the Nile. Beyond Roman Egypt lies the ancient kingdom of Kush. Its political center was farther south, around Meroe. Kush was not some isolated civilization unaware of Rome. It traded with the Mediterranean world. Its rulers controlled valuable resources and participated in long-distance commerce. And in the late 1st century BC, the balance changed dramatically. Rome had taken control of Egypt after the defeat of Cleopatra VII and Mark Antony. For Kush, Rome had suddenly become a powerful neighbor. And Rome's expansion created a new danger. The frontier between the two states was about to become a battlefield. Around 24 BC, Kushite forces invaded Roman Egypt. At the center of the resistance was a queen known as Amanirenas. The evidence is fragmentary, but Roman accounts describe Kushite attacks on settlements in southern Egypt. The Kushites captured Roman prisoners and seized imperial images. And one object tells the story better than almost anything else. A bronze head of Emperor Augustus. It was taken from Roman territory and eventually buried beneath a temple entrance at Meroe. Every person entering the temple would effectively step over the face of Rome's emperor. The symbolism is extraordinary. But the war did not end with a symbolic victory. Rome retaliated. The Roman governor of Egypt, Gaius Petronius, marched south. The Kushite capital of Napata was attacked and sacked. The war had become dangerous for both sides. And this is where Amanirenas becomes especially interesting. She did not simply disappear after Rome's counterattack. The conflict continued. Eventually, Rome and Kush negotiated peace. The exact diplomatic process is difficult to reconstruct, and the ancient evidence is incomplete. But the result was significant. Rome did not permanently annex Kush. The frontier was stabilized. And the Kushites gained terms that allowed their kingdom to remain independent. The confrontation had demonstrated something extraordinary. Rome could destroy cities. Rome could send armies south. But even Rome had limits. Sometimes an empire could win battles without getting everything it wanted. And Amanirenas had forced Rome to negotiate. Her story is also a reminder of how much ancient history has been filtered through Roman sources. The Meroitic language remains only partly understood, and much of Kush's own written perspective is inaccessible to us. That means Amanirenas is known largely through the eyes of the power she opposed. And perhaps that is why her story is so easy to underestimate. She was not simply a queen who fought Rome. She was part of a kingdom that survived beside Rome for centuries. But the third queen would take the confrontation to another level. She would not merely defend a border. She would build a rival power. The third queen is Zenobia. Palmyra. The Syrian desert. A city surrounded by wealth. Palmyra stood along major caravan routes connecting the Roman Mediterranean with the Near East and territories farther east. Its merchants became extraordinarily wealthy. Its culture blended influences from different worlds. Roman, Greek, Aramaic, Iranian, Arabian. Palmyra was neither simply Roman nor simply Eastern. It was something more complicated. And that position became extremely valuable during the 3rd century AD. Rome was entering a period of political chaos. Emperors rose and fell. Armies fought one another. Enemies attacked the empire's borders. And in this unstable world, Palmyra became increasingly powerful. Its military leader Odenathus supported Rome against the Sasanian Persian Empire. Then, around AD 267, Odenathus was murdered. His widow, Zenobia, became regent for their young son Babalathus. And she inherited something far more dangerous than a throne. She inherited an opportunity. Rome was distracted. Its eastern provinces were vulnerable. And Zenobia moved. Palmyrene forces expanded into Roman-controlled territories. Egypt fell under Palmyrene control. Parts of Asia Minor followed. Suddenly, the queen of a desert city was controlling an enormous stretch of territory. The scale was astonishing. The Met describes Zenobia's Palmyrene state as expanding beyond Syria into Egypt and much of Asia Minor. But what exactly did Zenobia intend? This is where history becomes complicated. Was she trying to create a completely independent empire? Was she initially acting as a Roman ally while exploiting imperial weakness? Or did independence emerge gradually as the conflict escalated? Historians debate the exact political intentions. What is certain is that Rome eventually regarded her power as intolerable. And then a new emperor arrived. Aurelian. Unlike several of his predecessors, Aurelian was determined to reunify the empire. He marched east. Zenobia had made a gamble. Now Rome was coming for everything she had built. The armies met. Aurelian defeated Palmyrene forces in major engagements and advanced toward Palmyra. Zenobia retreated. The city was placed under pressure. Eventually, she attempted to flee toward the Euphrates. She was captured. And then one of ancient history's greatest mysteries begins. What happened to Zenobia? The famous image shows her being taken to Rome in golden chains and displayed in Aurelian's triumph. But historians have reasons to be cautious. Much of the dramatic story comes from the Historia Augusta, a late Roman collection of imperial biographies famous for its unreliable and sometimes invented material. Other ancient sources give conflicting accounts of Zenobia's fate. Some traditions suggest she died before reaching Rome. Others say she was executed. Another tradition says she survived and lived in comfort among Roman elites. So the truth is frustratingly uncertain. The queen who once ruled across much of Rome's eastern frontier disappears into conflicting stories. But one thing is beyond doubt. Her rebellion had been serious enough to force the Roman emperor to personally campaign against Palmyra. And Rome did not simply absorb the city peacefully. After Zenobia's defeat, Palmyra itself suffered further punishment when it rebelled again. The city's power was broken. Its political independence was gone. But its queen became immortal. Boudica fought because Roman rule had become intolerable to her people. Amanirenas confronted Rome from an independent kingdom south of Egypt. Zenobia exploited a collapsing political order and attempted to transform Palmyra into a major regional power. None of them defeated Rome permanently. And that distinction matters. History often turns resistance into legend. But these queens were not superheroes. They made calculations. They made mistakes. They relied on armies, allies, geography, resources, and political circumstances. And they could lose. Boudica lost her final battle. Amanirenas faced the destruction of Napata before peace was reached. Zenobia's expanding state was dismantled by Aurelian. Yet measuring their importance only by whether they won misses the larger story. Boudica forced Rome to reconsider how it governed Britain. Amanirenas helped preserve Kush's independence in the face of Roman expansion. Zenobia demonstrated just how vulnerable the Roman Empire could become when its central government was distracted by internal crisis. And all three reveal something uncomfortable about empires. They look unstoppable from a distance. But on the frontier, power is negotiated every day. A governor makes a decision. A local ruler refuses. A city rebels. A queen raises an army. A general marches. And suddenly, the map of an empire begins to change. Perhaps the most remarkable detail is that all three queens were recorded primarily by cultures that viewed their resistance from the outside. Boudica's story comes through Roman historians. Ammonirina's is partly obscured because Meroitic writing remains difficult to fully interpret. Zenobia's story is tangled in later Roman narratives that were often written to explain why an emperor deserved victory. The women themselves left far fewer words than the men who wrote about them. So when we remember these queens, we should also remember the problem of historical memory. We are often not hearing their voices. We are hearing what their enemies, successors, and later admirers said about them. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. What would Boudica have said about Rome if we possessed her own account? What did Ammonirina's believe she had achieved when the treaty was signed? And did Zenobia truly dream of an independent empire? Or was she simply navigating a collapsing world until Rome finally forced her hand? We may never know. But the evidence we do have is enough to tell us something remarkable. These queens did not need to destroy Rome to challenge it. They only needed to prove that Rome could be resisted. Boudica turned a conquered province into a rebellion. Ammonirina's forced a Roman superpower into diplomacy. Zenobia transformed a wealthy caravan city into the center of a rival Eastern power. Their kingdoms eventually changed. Their monuments fell. Their political victories faded. But their defiance survived. Because empires often write the official history. The rebels leave behind the questions. And sometimes, centuries later, those questions are more powerful than the answers. So when you look at the ancient world, remember this. Rome was not challenged only by kings and generals. Sometimes, the greatest threat stood beneath a crown. Which of these three queens do you think history has remembered most unfairly, and why?